Sorry for the technical difficulties before. Well, I'm here today to give you an update, not on summer 18, but on actually 19 and 20. All right, my mistake. But usually, I've come here, I've talked to you guys many times before about thresholds, about regulatory thresholds, about how to avoid lawsuits, things like that. And I usually can find something very good that's going on in the estuaries of Mashpee. And I'll tell you, for the first time in 20 years, I got nothing good to say. I could leave now. I said, for the first time in 20 years, I have nothing good to say. Sorry about that. I'll go through just the background a little bit for those who haven't seen this before. But the basic problem is in our estuaries, in Mashpee and worldwide, the big issue is nitrogen loading. It's been that way for a long time. We know that. We now know that's the problem for almost every estuary on Cape Cod and in southeastern Massachusetts, in fact. They're all overloaded and they all have some level of degradation. The enrichment in nitrogen is causing real impairments to not only the water quality with increased algal blooms, low oxygen, but we've lost our eelgrass and we're losing our benthic animals, which means we'll start losing our fish, or we've already started losing our fish, we just don't know it yet. The only way that you can really fix the problem is you can either get the water out quicker, which you're not going to be able to do in either Popponesset Bay or in Waquoit. That's already been done. That was a low-hanging fruit, and we attacked that more than a decade ago, and that's in place already. So you can't get more out of that. The other thing to do is you can control what goes in, how much goes in, and that's what the town is trying to do now with its phase 1 wastewater plan. And also you can try to increase nitrogen removal and transport, which also has been done a little bit, but hasn't been maximized yet in these two embayments.
And how do you do that, Brian?
Usually in a town, in Mashpee, it would be by either trying to do wetland restoration of cranberry bogs into freshwater wetlands and ponds, which would intercept the nitrogen. It's a natural process. It used to go on all over the place. We then converted the freshwater wetlands to cranberry bogs. Now they're fallow, restoring them back, if it's done the right way. Restoring it back to be a nice freshwater wetland's great, but if it isn't designed with the idea of lowering the nitrogen that's transported through it, then it's not going to work. You'll have a nice wetland, but it won't lower the nitrogen passing through it. There are programs like that. There's a program going in right now. It's already been funded, and it's going in Harwich, where they built both freshwater wetlands and freshwater ponds in a cranberry bog that used to be freshwater wetland. And now that is going on already. We'll get some good information on that pretty much in a year or so. That's one way. The other way is salt marsh restoration, which also is going on a bit. Let's see, I always worry about hitting the wrong button here. All right, well, the water quality program itself, actually, I'll say one positive thing. The water quality program itself has been operating very well. We have the volunteers. It's a collaborative between the tribe and the town and the university. And we've met all of our sampling all these years. Everyone is still participating in full. The samples, we're collecting 100% of our samples that we're supposed to get. And that's important because we've scaled back the program to sort of a minimum level that works. But it's okay as long as you get all those samples and everybody does what they're supposed to do. And so far that has been done. The program is overseen by the Mashpee Waterways Commission. The goals are to assess the nutrient-related water quality of each estuary, which we've reported on before, but also to track short and long-term changes in the embayment health. And you'll hear a little bit of that tonight. And also to look for specific validation of nitrogen management alternatives, such as if you're doing a nitrogen removal on a freshwater pond or lake, or if you're building a treatment plant and you're putting in sewers, that's what's meant by nitrogen management, and we hope to see those changes going forward. In Waquoit, we have 18 estuarine stations, the red dots, and we have sort of 4 sampling events a year. We also measure what's coming in from the freshwater streams. I won't be talking about that today, but that's where a lot of the load enters the bay through the freshwater streams, carrying watershed-derived nitrogen, mainly from septic systems, that enter the groundwater, that enter the stream, that then enter the bay. Okay, wait a second. In Popponesset, we have a few less. It's a smaller system. a little less complex, but we have 6 estuarine stations and 4 sampling vents as well. And you notice that there's samples are distributed all throughout both of these bays, both Popponesset and Waquoit. That does a lot for our ability to predict meeting regulatory TMDLs from the data we have. We can really bang that out. If you only had one station, you would not be deemed legitimate. So this gives us a good thing. It also provides cross checks between the different sampling teams. There's a lot of value to that, and it doesn't really add much since the sampling is all done by volunteers from the tribe and the town and actually the university as well. And they all volunteer to this program because it's actually one of the better programs around in the region. All right, one just little piece of data. The reason we're interested in nitrogen is this shows salinity on the bottom axis, the nitrogen-phosphorus ratio on the left axis. And the whole point of this is if the dots are above the red line, it means that phosphorus fertilizes. If you added phosphorus, you might have a bloom. But all the ones really are below the line, if you notice, except for a few in that very brackish salinity, very, very low salinity area in the 5 to 8 parts per thousand range. All the rest show that nitrogen fertilizes. And we've done this every year. This is from 18, but we do this every year and it looks the same. This is just the one that I had easiest access to. This is still background. It indicates that we need to manage for nitrogen and restore this system. The other thing is that another way to check is if you look at this, those dots are sampling points, raw data from the field. Particulate nitrogen is just nitrogen in particulate form. And in this case, it looks like it's 100% in the form of phytoplankton. It's associated 1-to-1 with the chlorophyll A, which means it's phytoplankton. So it's not leaves. When we started this project, there was an argument out that it was leaves from the trees around the pond, but that wouldn't look like this, or that it was turbidity coming in from the streams. You'd get, silton's clay coming in, but that doesn't have any chlorophyll. So again, we're just trying to drive home the point that not only do we know that nitrogen causes all these negative effects, but we also know that in these bays, that is what is controlling those algal blooms that you see, both the macroalgal blooms and the phytoplankton blooms that you see. All right, so I always used to show the left-hand slide here and say, so this is the distribution of nitrogen in the bay under 2010 loading, which was sort of when we started really intensively the new branded water quality monitoring program. And the idea is dark blue is that it's high quality, or not high quality, but it's lower. Red is it's very high, and you look at that and you say, well, yeah, there's high spots, and I see in the eastern abatements and Waquoit. But the problem is the right-hand graph is that you see that as build-out continues, the nitrogen levels in the estuaries are getting higher and higher and higher and higher. Now, mainly in the upper reaches, they'll get highest first because that's where the streams discharge. That's where groundwater nitrogen is focused. But you see it just gets higher because of build-out. Nobody is doing anything to the bay. The tide is the same, but you're just increasing the amount of development, the increased amount, in this case, of septic systems for residential development. That is our primary development in the town of Mashpee. Even with the commas, it's still resident, it's us. Right. Same thing with Popponesset Bay, the scales are the same. Left was back in 2008, right is built at build out, and you just see the Mashpee River just turns bright red, which is exceedingly high nitrogen, by the way.
Brian?
Yeah.
Are those build-outs assuming continuation of reliance on septics and not intervention?
It is before last May.
Okay.
So it was accurate up till last May, when you guys had your unanimous town meeting vote. Okay, so that's the bright spot. But what you're seeing is not going to get better. And the other thing in this I would like you to notice is that you notice that in Popponesset Bay, where it all comes together with Mashpee River discharges, Shoestring Bay, and Okoye Bay discharge, that upper basin, you'll notice that you're starting to then push the high nitrogen water down into the main bay. And that's happening in Waquoit. Happens here. It's just you're loading up the top. It's obviously got to leave, and so it's moving down, increasing not just where it discharges, but in the main bay is now becoming more and more impacted. Not going to show a lot of graphs tonight. I don't need to, as it ends up, but I'll show the regulatory graphs. Okay, these are the ones that you don't ever want to see when you're sitting with a regulator. The bars represent data all the way from our long-term mean, which is pre-2010, and then brackets of 3-year brackets of 2010 to 12, 13 to 15, 16 to 18, and then 19 and 20 are the last 2 years we had. What you see is that in the left-hand suite with a threshold of 0.38 and the right-hand suite with a threshold of 0.3, you notice that every single bar in every single year is over that threshold. In the middle one, Quashnet River gets a slightly higher threshold, but you notice every single bar at every single station, every single year is above the threshold. That's a regulatory threshold. That is the TMDL. And so that's what people argue about in court. I like dogs.
Tom, can you mute your phone?
All right. So
Please, thank you.
the result of that is that you're seeing algal blooms. We use chlorophyll A as the surrogate for phytoplankton biomass. There's a relationship between the amount of chlorophyll A you have and the amount of phytoplankton there are. It's very difficult to measure phytoplankton biomass, but we can quantify very accurately the amount of chlorophyll. The red line at the bottom is, actually it says sound, but it isn't. It's higher than the sound. It's actually, if you're over that line, you're in eutrophic conditions. But the basic point is the horizontal line, that's, if the bay was cleaned up, that's where all those bars would be. It's not a regulatory number, but that's where it would be. If all those bars came down to the red line, we'd be happy. You could see that some of them are good, like ER low on the, sort of in the middle. You'll see that until 2020, it was below the line. And you see in WB, which is Waquoit Bay low, which is down near the inlet, you can see until, again, 2020, it was below the line. And in fact, if you really look at this, which I don't expect you to do for length, although the document is out, even the shorthand presentation is out, and what you do, if you really stare at this, you will see that since 2016, phytoplankton growth and blooms in this system have grown, increased in frequency, and increased in magnitude. We always predicted that would happen someday. You know it's going to happen. As long as you keep bleeding in more nitrogen, it's going to happen. And it's now here. In all of the basins, this is Waquoit. So it is highest in the uppermost basins, but you can see the one in the middle, the QR, that's Quashnet River, is just unbelievably high. I mean, those numbers are astronomical. Likely in those sites, there's absolutely nothing living that's an animal in those sites. Okay. Told you it wasn't good news. Okay, then we also use an index, just to speed things along, we use an index that uses the amount of phytoplankton there are, how much oxygen is depleted in the system, how much nitrogen there is in the system, how clear the water is, and you mush all that together and you come up with one number. Now, it's not a number you're going to plan for necessarily, but it's a pretty good number to tell you how things are going. And what you see here in 19 and 20, the left-hand triangle is 19, the right-hand triangle is 2020, the averages. You'll see that in the upper reaches, like in Quashnet, in Childs, in Eel River, those red triangles mean that it is significantly impaired, is highly impaired, it goes down as poor water quality. And poor water quality doesn't mean it in any way acceptable. It is exceedingly bad. High oxygen depletion, so it's getting down to 3 and 4 milligrams per liter. It's just really, really bad. The yellow reds, which you see now in the Seafoot River, and in the middle of the main basin, and in the middle of Eel River, and now also a little bit in Hamlin Pond, which used to not be that way, are now showing that they're already down. They're sort of almost poor. It's sort of half poor, half crummy. Okay, it's not quite as bad as red, but it's bad. And the yellow just means it's moderately impaired. The levels are high, but the impairment is not to the extent where there's nothing living. Okay, there's still some valid use to the system, but it's impaired. Any one of those stations would say that the regulatory agencies would say this system is impaired. You will have to fix that. And you'll see that every single station is red or yellow. And the bad news is, this is how it used to look not that long ago, about 4 years ago. If you look, you'll see the same reds and everything, and yellows and all that. But you'll notice in the lower part of Eel Pond on the left, and in the lower part of Okoye Bay nearest the inlet is always the best water quality in the bay. And you'll see that now in the last 4 years, when this happens for a year, it doesn't matter so much, we don't go crazy. But this has been continuous now for 4 years. This is it. This is the new now. And you'll see that now there is no high water quality area remaining in Waquoit Bay. It's gone. 4 years ago or 5 years ago, it was here. Now it's totally gone. And it's been gone every year for the last 4 years. That's why I can make the statement tonight. I'm not going to go through this in any detail, other than if you look at the trend column, which is the second from the left, what do you see? Well, the water quality is declining, declining, declining. It's not quite as bad in Yahoo Pond and Hamlin Pond as in the rest of the bay. The shellfish actually did make a pretty good difference a couple years ago. It's sort of weakening as things have been trending downwards, but it's still an effect that you can see. It still is having a positive effect. It's just not enough to restore that system at this point. And the other ones, even Upper Quashnet, it's unchanging because you just can't get worse than it is. I've never seen a system almost as bad as that. And in Charles River, it's not changing, but it's horrible. And Upper Eel River is not changing, but it's also poor water quality. Lower end near the inlet is what has just changed in the last 5 years. And the lower basin in Waquoit Bay is also declined to poor water quality, or moderate water quality. Same graph for Popponesset as Waquoit. That's the threshold. That is the regulatory threshold where all those bars should be at or below that threshold. And what you'll see is virtually none of them are, not even down near the mouth of the bay. They're all in excess of that threshold, and it has the same effect as in Waquoit. Popponesset just got there a little sooner than Waquoit. So again, all the stations exceed the TMDL threshold in each of the years. Same thing, as you see, there's mainly reds and yellows and yellow reds in the upper part. The main basin is always the last thing to go, and you'll see it's only moderately impaired, and there's still some good habitat in there, but not great habitat. It would not be deemed healthy. It would be deemed moderately impaired, which is still impaired. So in a regulatory sense, the whole system is impaired. Usually in a system, it's only the upper tributaries. It'd only be Shoestring Bay, Mashpee River, and Okoye Bay. But now it's crept down, and I remember a time when the main bay was blue. So it has crept down into the main bay. It's moving towards the inlet. Same thing. We have some declines, but there's just nothing improving. And why would it? We haven't done too much, and we've done more in Waquoit than we've done in Popponesset. Although the one good thing we did in Popponesset was years ago, Waterways got a revolving fund to maintain that inlet open all the time, which maintains a good flushing of that system. The system's pretty much flushing as good as it's going to flush. And if it hadn't been done, think of how bad it would be if the system just stopped flushing. It would be much worse than it is now. Okay. So the general findings are that there's general impairment throughout both estuaries. No high water quality areas remain. There's been a gradual decline in the lower basins over the last 5 or 10 years to make them worse. And the upper tributary basins remain just significantly impaired because there's such poor water quality, it's hard to get it worse. Frequency and magnitude of phytoplankton blooms is increasing. 2016 and 17, we had monstrous blooms throughout both bays. Also in 3 bays, this isn't a Mashpee problem, this is a regional problem. And the magnitude's going up, but it's not every year. What'll happen is, first, in the old days, it was once in a while. Then in 16, 17, it was monstrous for the summer, and now it's coming with periodic blooms for a week or 2 or 3. But the frequency of those has increased from a long time ago, not very much, to now a lot. And there's clear evidence that the declines are due to nitrogen enrichment in bay waters. The demonstrated connection between nitrogen concentration in the bay and the phytoplankton and the low oxygen, things like that. So, and I got to tell you, this is basic. This is not unique. This is the classic cascade and ecology that really nobody argues with anymore because there's thousands and thousands of examples of this now. It's just that we're quantifying in a way to help you with management. Next set of results were that the results indicate the monitoring program is able to detect changes in response to implementation. Like the shellfish, we actually could measure the effect of the shellfish for a couple of years there. And we even got a little bit last year. So it hasn't gone completely away. It's just that it's no longer improving. It's now sort of going down again as load increases. And the good news is the town implementing CWMP Phase 1, we will track, hopefully, and see the water quality now start to improve. People say, well, how long does it take? Well, it depends on where you would do your implementation. But most of Popponesset Bay, for instance, the watershed is within 10-year travel time of the bay. Almost 80% or more is within 10-year travel time. So if you're doing any storing in that, that means the impact of that would be from 1 to 10 years hitting the bay. Very fast. You wouldn't have to wait 20 years for that to happen. You wouldn't have to wait for your kids to be old, like me. So that's sort of good news on how quickly the bay can restore. So I want to thank all the volunteers from the town and the tribe. There's no way to do this without the volunteers. The cost would be astronomical. They show up like tomorrow morning. Everybody's going to be getting in their boats at 5:30 in the morning to go out on the bay. You're welcome to join us anytime you want. And also to the Mashpee Waterways Commission, because especially Don McDonald has kept this thing pushing along the logistics to keep people on track and timing and all that. And the quality of the data is significantly due to his efforts.